conscious or primordial part that said, but this person didn't do anything wrong trying to get free, or this person didn't do anything wrong harboring this person that was trying to be free.
You were trying to say something?
Well, when you mentioned that the suppressing of evidence sometimes is itself the strongest evidence, and that comes from a famous trial. In 1735, John Peter Zenger, a publisher, a newspaper man in the colony of New York, the United States was not a country yet, it was a colony of England, he published articles criticizing the royal governor, William Cosby. The governor was selling judgeships for money, selling judgeships, corruption. And he got the information and he published it. But Zenger was arrested and he was tried for seditious libel. It was a crime to criticize public officials, and that crime was called seditious libel. So at his trial, his attorney, Andrew Hamilton, tried to bring in the evidence to prove the truth of what Mr. Zenger was saying in front of the jury. That even though he had criticized the governor, the criticism was right.
Exactly.
And the judge suppressed it. He stopped that, would not allow that. Of course, the judge had been appointed by William Cosby, the governor, who was the corrupt governor. And so Andrew Hamilton, the defense attorney, he did this. He said, we've tried to get our evidence in, it's been suppressed. I will lay it down for you to consider. The suppression of evidence ought always to be taken as the strongest evidence.
Yes.
They have something to hide. I hope it will have that weight with you. The jury went out and in 15 minutes came back with a not guilty verdict. And that is, of course, one of the greatest jury nullification trials in history. And it's the start of the First Amendment in the United States.
Yeah, and now in modern day, you know, as things get more sophisticated and everything, I mean, here, we sitting here, we're doing a TV show now. Had I known what we are capable of at the trial that I keep making reference to, an audio tape was produced that we don't know where it came from. Now that I've learned how you can do these things, we can actually tape this right now, and if I want to, I can make you say something totally different. So not even what you see in here is the truth anymore.
By clever editing, take a word here or there.
Yeah, and it looks exactly like it.
You know, I saw John Candy's last movie, Wagons East, and he died during the middle of the making of the movie. So part of the movie has the real John Candy. But the end of the movie, when they finish the movie, they have a computer image generated of John Candy. And I knew this ahead of time when I saw the movie, and I thought, I'm going to try to see the break where the real John Candy ends and the fake computer-generated one begins. I could not tell. I could not tell. And it was a chilling experience because it means anybody can be framed for anything.
That's my point.
If someone with enough power is producing this electronic type evidence, they can frame any of us. So the jury has to rely on something else. A conscience and intuition is a way of knowing when things are being kept from you, when truth is being kept from you. It's getting into Joseph Campbell here, I suppose.
I think that one thing we can tell jurors is that when you see lawyers at sidebar constantly, when you see lawyers arguing whether evidence should be admitted or not constantly, that should put up a red flag in every juror's head right there. Are we reaching the point where I'm being withheld evidence and maybe there should be a reasonable doubt, just based on the very conduct of this trial?
Now, as you know, some of the modern day trials, I mean, they resulted in riots and all kinds of things. O.J. Simpson thing, trial, for instance. So whatever happens to one person just affects a lot of people. And you know, people couldn't understand why that jury went the way it did.
Yeah, you know, the O.J. case was a very highly publicized case. It just totally captured the media for a long period of time. And basically, it's a murder trial. And I think that everybody in our society would agree that murder should be on the books as a illegal act. But in the O.J. trial, I think there were some very good reasons for the jury doing what it did. First of all, there was a man who did not really get to testify, to finish his testimony, and he was a whistleblower that had been hired by the lab that performed the blood testing in the O.J. case. And he had whistleblown on a couple of other cases that that lab had performed. and he was either demoted or fired. But he was called as a defense witness in the O.J. trial to tell about this lab that had performed the O.J. tests. Well, his testimony was shut down, but the jury heard enough to know that there was some question about the lab. The glove didn't fit. There were no eyewitnesses to this. There wasn't a huge amount of blood.
But there was a dog.
Well, okay, there was a dog.
Yeah.
But the jury wasn't even out deliberating all that long in the O.J. trial. And this is basically a common law crime. It's an important trial to O.J. and to the victims. But I think that we've overblown this trial. And it wasn't a case of jury nullification. Some people said, well, it's because he was black, and the jury felt sorry for him, and there were blacks on the jury, and therefore they just nullified the laws of murder. They ignored the laws. I don't think that's what happened at all. I think they had reasonable doubt that this crime had actually occurred. Certainly the performance by Mark Furman would have led the jury to question the LAPD and all of their tactics. It really brought that up, that there may have been institutionalized prejudice against blacks and mistreatment of them. And so it really tainted their evidence. It really caused their evidence to be seen in a lesser light, evidence that might have been presented by another person that was upstanding and accepted by the jury. In this case, it wasn't. So this wasn't jury nullification, really.
Yeah, but it did have some good points to it, you know, if we can go there for a minute, because it was on everybody's television station. People learned about DNA. And I mean, if you go down the street and say, can I tell you about DNA today? Well, of course they don't want to hear that. But because the way this happened, people got educated. And I would think in the future can use that to, you know, to either help themselves, or at least they know what DNA is. The little kids know what DNA is as a result of that.
That was the decisive part of the trial for me, and Pat alluded to it. When Fred Whitehurst, the former FBI lab technician, testified, and Judge Ito let him testify at least in part, and the jury got the message, he testified that the FBI asked lab technicians to fake the evidence. Therefore, the DNA evidence is not reliable. Not 100% reliable. And so what he pointed out, and I think the jury began thinking this way too, the DNA evidence is only as good as whoever gathers it. I mean, they can take a blood sample out of you or me and get the DNA and then say they found it anywhere. Put it in a little plastic bag that's labeled crime scene, and then they bring that into the courtroom and say, here, DNA from the crime scene. It's only as good as who gathers it. And so when Mark Furman's integrity was impugned by his background coming out, and then when Fred Whitehurst says even the lab technicians are leaned on to fake the evidence, this created a tremendous amount of reasonable doubt, at least. And I want to say I commend Judge Ito for at least letting in part of it, because there's a great many judges who would have used that relevancy rule we talked about last time.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not relevant, and keep it out. Often I have seen it over and over. All the defense evidence is deemed irrelevant, and all the prosecution evidence is deemed relevant and comes in. Defense evidence stays out, prosecution evidence comes in. Well, what's the result going to be then?
Yeah, so the result is slave labor in America.
That's right.
Yeah, people of all walks of life, actually. You know, I mean, we shouldn't really make that a total minority issue, because it's a people issue. It doesn't matter who you are. You know, if you fit the bill, that's where you're going.
You know, there was another trial going on during the time of the O.J. trial, which I feel was a much more important trial, and that was the Branch Davidians trial.
Yeah.
And in that case, their theory of the case was that they had used self-defense. And their theory of the case was not allowed by the court to be presented to the jury. And the jury was very sympathetic to the, I believe there were 8 or 9 Branch Davidians on trial. And what the jury did was they wanted to give these Branch Davidians just a little slap on the hand. They wanted to throw a bone to the government because there had been many charges filed against them. And so they did find them guilty of what they considered to be some lesser offenses. or lower offenses, but it ended up that the court basically sentenced them, gave them very severe sentences. And I don't think a lot of people realize that, and partly because the O.J. case, which is basically it's a run-of-the-mill murder case, it overshadowed the Branch Davidian trial. There are Branch Davidians doing 10 and, what is it?
40 years.
40 years, yeah, 40 years in the penitentiary now. And their basic theory of the case, that they were using self-defense, was never allowed to be presented to the jury.
But here on the internet, you'll run into it all the time. People on the internet wouldn't let that rest, and they kept at it and they kept at it. And I believe that that is part of the reason that they had to go into the Waco thing again, because of the pressure from the people. They just wouldn't let it go. So maybe eventually, that is something that can be resolved and changed.
Well, I believe that the re-interest in the Waco trial is a very good sign in America. But we still have to face the cold, hard reality is that none of those Branch Davidians have been released from prison because of the re-interest in the Waco situation. In other words, they're still sitting in a prison cell as we speak. Nothing has happened positive in their lives. If our country really feels remorse about the Branch Davidians, then they should be released. It should be something like what's happening over here in the Wenatchee situation, where we've actually got innocent people coming out of prison.
Yeah. I believe that on a 1 to 10, we might be able to save 1, because the first thing is you run out of money. You run out of money and you say, help me. And when we went through that, I had lawyers from New York, from Los Angeles. They called from all over the world. Well, oh, I can help you with that. And you think, oh, I'm so happy, and you're so grateful. And then when they say, well, I'll get right to it, just send that, including a check, blah, blah, blah. And you don't have that. And then even that part becomes profit that's connected to the prisons eventually. So normal people cannot afford to go to jail. Broke people. And I think that's why they try to take everything away from you. So
you can't defend yourself.
Can't do anything. So unless you find somebody out of the kindness of their heart and say, well, I'm trying to help you or make a landmark case out of it, you're just stuck.
O.J. as a defendant is unusual in the sense that he did have the money to defend himself. The government can spend millions and millions on a case it wants to spend that kind of money on. And most defendants absolutely cannot do that. They have to take a plea or they're just totally outclassed. But O.J. could come up with the resources at his criminal trial to defend himself. Another man or woman accused of that sort of thing, they would have never had the money for the investigation, to find Fred Whitehurst, to find Furman's background. They would have been convicted, maybe even executed.
Yeah, executed.
Maybe even executed. And it's just a tragedy.
We had...
I was reaching for a prop. I'll wait.
Yeah, I can't remember which one it is.
Well, this is a Newsweek article. It says, "When justice lets us down." I'll hold it here for a moment.
It's okay, we got it.
And there are several things in this. This is mainly talking about the death penalty and a book called Actual Innocence. It talks about so many people on death row being innocent. And for example, in Illinois here, since 1976, that state has executed 12 people on death row, but it has let 13 people on death row go because they were found to be innocent. Now, they were not found to be innocent by the police. It's not that the prosecutors looked at their case again. It is that students, sometimes young students who want to become journalists, students and journalists would not let the cases go.
That's right.
It's people outside the system who doggedly kept after it. And the governor of Illinois, a moral feeling has arisen in him, and he has said he is calling for a moratorium, and he has the power to commute or stay executions. Most governors do. He has put down a moratorium on executions in Illinois until, he says, we can get this justice system sorted out. When more than half the people on death row are innocent, something is very
It's
wrong.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that is wrong, and I'll get back to the juries, is so many of these juries are so-called death qualified. They're not true juries. They don't represent the community. All the Quakers are thrown off. They will ask you in voir dire, the questioning before they choose a jury, how do you feel about the death penalty? If you're against the death penalty, you are immediately stricken off.
Yeah.
If you are for the death penalty, you're put on the jury.
Yeah.
But then that means the jury is conviction prone too, because people who are for the death penalty, often they're more likely to believe police, or they may just be more likely to want to kill somebody.
Yeah. Now, I don't remember if we used the. I wanna. Yeah, this is the one, and then
You
I
want
wanna.
to look at that?
Yeah, and then I also wanna show that. I'll let you talk about that for a little bit. I'm gonna hold it this time. How
Okay.
about that? And I don't know if we can do it like that. So I'm gonna hold that, and you can just talk
Very
about
good.
it for a while.
Okay, that is a article I copied from a newspaper called the New Federalist, and it is a long article entitled "Worse Than Slavery: Post-Civil War Convict Labor Policy." See, we have been here before, where a prison industry arose and preyed upon poor people, and in this case, specifically poor black people. After the Civil War, slavery was reestablished through the prison system. What legislatures did, bigoted legislatures in the South did, is establish laws, pass laws, forbid white people from hiring black people in certain instances, forbid black people from going into business, and then leave them nothing to turn to support their families except crime. There's some chickens here, 2 chickens. They made it a crime to steal chickens. It was mostly young black men or black men trying to provide for their families that stole chickens. You could get 10 years for stealing a chicken. Now, they would not live out their sentence because then the prison system in these states, and I'm talking the 1880s, 1890s, around the turn of the century, they rented the prisoners out to private industry in these southern states for something like 10 or 20 cents a day, dirt cheap. The prisoners were put to work in mines and road building, draining swamps, building the plantations. Much of the wealth of the South around the turn of the century was built by prison convict labor. These men often lived only 2 or 3 years. There was no medical care. They were literally worked to death. And at night, they were put in iron cages that were like sweat boxes. And so they just literally died. The operators of this system did not care. The companies that rented them didn't care because they always get more. They'd always get more. One dies for 20 cents, we'll get another one because the prison system was just filling up with black people. Before these laws were passed to establish the convict labor system in the South, there was roughly a proportionate number of white and black prisoners, and their sentences were moderate. But as this system grew and grew, slavery was reestablished in a worse form. Not quite as widespread. Not all black people were slaves, but the young black males, a lot of them became slaves, and they didn't live very long under this system. Anyway, as the system grew, there were fewer and fewer white people and more black people until it was 90% blacks in these prisons, and 90% of them were in the convict labor system.
One of the things that I found, I don't remember if I said it on this show or if we talked about it previously. I believe the reason the racial setting is set up like that. I talked to some of the wives of the Caucasian prisoners, and they were usually there for weapons charges or white collar, what do you call that? Embezzlement and things like that. And what is interesting, what we found, this is an unofficial, my own opinion here, was that a lot of these people had been in the military at one time or another, and they either had, they worked in, the MOS was that, they should be unbelievable at one time. Some of them had been with intelligence, and so by imprisoning them, if they ever ask any questions, so they're either in the nut house or in the prisons. And so that takes away from that whole part of the population, so it's just been manipulated. really greatly, wouldn't you say?
Yes, their credibility is being
Yeah.
destroyed. They had worked in intelligence. They knew about some of the things our government does, like in
Right.
other countries, the mass murders our government commits. And then their credibility is destroyed. After the government uses them, it is afraid of them and has them railroaded into prison to destroy their credibility. So if they go to the newspapers with some story, oh, it's just a convict.
And that's it, yeah. And that's what I have found in my personal travels. It was always something like that. Now, if I get you to reach behind me, yeah, this one there. I'm gonna let you talk about this one for a minute. Prisoners for Profit is a publication, and I'm not sure who sends that out. I know the local Rainbow Coalition has works in progress, and they do books for prisoners and where people write and suggest things. This was very interesting to me.
This is an expose that was printed in the Spotlight, which is a newspaper, and it details some of the things you've already explained about Unicor and about the extent of the use of convict labor in the corporate setting. The low wages, the fact that communities cannot compete with prison labor, and people in the community are very upset because we know that it's oftentimes very hard for people in our own communities, especially unskilled people or people who have dropped out of school, to find a job. And here they're competing against convicts, and the corporations have everything to gain, nothing to lose by using convict labor.
Okay, I'm going to take that away from you now. Real quick, your remedy for ending the war on drugs?
My remedy is to empower the jury and to send a message to all your listeners that when they sit on a trial jury, they have one duty, and that duty is to do justice. And that means that they must examine the facts of the case, and they must examine the law that they're being asked to apply, and they must do the right thing.
Would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I will echo that, and I'll say when you get your notice for jury service or jury duty, go, show up. Your society needs you. And if we're going to remedy this evil, you have to do it. When I was a young boy, there was this advertisement on TV, and Smokey the Bear would point to the burned up forest, this horrible catastrophe, and he'd point to you and say, only you can prevent forest fires. Well, the American people, we could say the same thing. Only you can prevent tyranny. And the way you get on the list to be chosen is you have to register to vote in most jurisdictions. This is why voting is important. We talked about vote scam last time. It may not be your ballot box vote that is really important. Maybe they don't even count that. But when you register to vote, you get on the list to be in the jury pool, and you have the opportunity to be chosen on a jury. And I think that's very important for people to go, and for people to always try to stay in contact with their conscience. It will take some strength to do that. Always stay in contact with the conscience. It will tell you things that the judge will not tell you, and the lawyers will not tell you.
Yeah. And on a personal, I want to add that if you have a friend or someone that you know that might suffer from depression because, what's being done to a family member or something like that, try not to make it a black and white issue, not racially, but just black and white. Go to the gray area and see how it got there anyway, because it's people that is related to people in the system. They also need your support. They need your understanding. Sometimes they just need a hug, and because we can't change too many things either, because if we try to, if we relate it to the offender, then it looks like we are prison advocates, and we're really not trying to do that. See, so that sort of immobilized us too from speaking out too much. Then, that can be construed. Did I say that word? Construed?
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 Oh, I was close.
Interpreted?
Yeah, I was very, very,
Very close.
You have any long-term plans this summer?
This summer? Well, my long-term plans this summer are to spend time with my parents. They're aged, and they need me to help them and just be with them. And I'll say a personal note to people. Oftentimes your parents can be your best friends. They cared for you when you were young, and it's your duty to care for them when they're old. And, when they're gone, you'll never have them back. those moments you can't recapture. So I want to spend time with my parents and still try to farm. I'm farming, and I'm farming about 100 miles away from my parents. So that is going to be difficult. And I'm going to try to do both of those things.
We'll find another subject, so you have to come back and tell us if you got crop circles and how your farming came out. In your plans?
Well, my plans are to spend time with my family, too. I'm going to be going to Missouri next week to spend some time with my mom, who's having heart surgery. And I have a granddaughter who's living in Seattle, and 2 daughters and a son, and I really enjoy being with them. And I'll keep working for the fully informed jury movement.
There's a wonderful place. It's called the Heinrich House in St. James. It's a winery, just wonderful people. If you're in that area, should stop in.
In Missouri.
Yes, in
Oh.
St. James, Missouri.
I'll keep that in mind.
Wonderful. He give you a whole tour of the place. Just a really wonderful being. And what do I plan on doing? Is I was invited by the Hopis to come and visit. So, universe willing, I'll try to do that. And in the meantime, we're going to continue with the shows. We're going to stay with you another season, I believe. And keep those letters coming. Keep your opinions coming. You can criticize us. We don't care. And again, I wanted to remind you of the opening shot that was really a very powerful statement by your own great Margaret Brennan. We have a wonderful staff. They always here when we need them. Cliff, Vivian, and our director Justin, and then there's Bernie, and hope they have a wonderful summer too. So let's end the war on drugs.
One thing, I have said so much, I guess, denigrating the ballot box, saying a ballot box isn't as important as the media says it is, but it still has some importance. And I'm urging people maybe to consider a third party. I can't think, I don't know, this might sound caustic. I can't think of 2 worse parties than the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, the 2 major parties. Yeah. And there's many choices out there, and just about every party other than the Republicans and Democrats has a more humane approach to the war on drugs. The Libertarian Party would abolish it outright totally. The Green Party,
yeah,
go ahead.
We're not going to try to do any of that. We was talking about more personal.
Oh, more personal?
We'll just do it. So I fully expect by the end of the summer for us 3 to have stopped the war on drugs. That's where we were going. Where we were going with that, yeah. And because that is another totally different subject. And so I guess time to go, you see. They were so impressed with us. They thrown us out of here. You have a nice summer and come back and see us next week. Bye-bye. Oh, boy. Yeah.